On stage are Dr. Oliver Oullier from Aix-Marseille University in France, and Julien Lamartin, Head of Strategy and Analytics for Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick have developed something very interesting that they call the science of engagement. We're out to hear what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, my charming co-presenter today, Olivier. We're going to guide you through what we call the science of engagement. Now, I know it's really late in the day, but someone today said that they like spider graphs. I have good news. This presentation has spider graphs. Right, thank you. First one, cheap one, but thanks. All right, so basically, we want to talk about what we call the science of engagement. It's interesting, a number of people have touched on the concept of engagement today. David in the very beginning asking, is there a definition for engagement? And if yes, how does measurement look like across different channels? We have people talking about the impact of engagement just a little while ago, really. And we are happy that others are pursuing that thought. And how did Weber Shandwick come to this? Well, as a PR agency, we obviously were sort of focused on what we call, what we right now call ground space. So all the channels that people are in, how to reach people in those channels, what to deploy in those channels, and so on and so on. And then at some point when we realized that engagement came up as a term more and more, we were asking ourselves, well, aren't we a little too focused on the ground space, and shouldn't we be much more focused on the brain space and ask, what makes content stick? Why do people react this way or that? Why do they process content at all? And a number of other questions really related to how our brain works and why we do certain things, behave in certain ways and don't behave in other ways, right? And that is when we thought, well, obviously we should be looking at this much more thoroughly as a profession, really, than we did for a number of years. But thankfully, there are people out there who do. So we turned to some experts in their fields, and you see the charming, handsome face of my colleague there, among others. So what we did is we convened a group of researchers from different disciplines. We brought together academics from anthropology, from psychology, and from neuroscience. They all deal with why we make decisions the way we do, why we behave in public or private the way we do, and why we function as a society, but from different perspectives. And that was the key here. And people like Jim over there will know that, in academia we tend to, and so before I went to Weber, I have to say I very much was a researcher at heart. We tend to also remain in our own silos. So if I'm a psychologist, I stay and stick with psychologists. If I'm an anthropologist, I do very much the same with my people, and so on and so on. And that was something where we thought, well, if we can break that wall down and have them speak to each other, that would be really fascinating. So that's what we did. We brought together Thomas here, Olivier, and Grant McCracken from those different disciplines and had them discuss what engagement is all about. And then afterwards, we posed a more challenging question, really, and that was, what drives engagement? And that led us to that idea of science of engagement. And the last thing I'd like to say before I turn over to Olivier is that this is not really a thought leadership project or something with a limited lifetime before it gets to a shelf and sits there as a neat report or anything. This is a methodology we've developed for us to really push forward, and you'll see that throughout our presentation. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce the science of engagement itself and have Olivier speak a little bit on that from the scientific perspective of things.
Yeah, thank you very much. What was important for us as academics when we were contacted by Weber Shandwick was not to be just interviewed and to be part of another set of dozens and dozens of interviews and having people saying, all right, interesting, let's speak a couple of phrases here, references there. We wanted to push this a little bit further than the theory and to have something that is actionable. And in order for this to be actionable, of course, we had to build on the research that the three of us were conducting and also all the research that we knew from our colleagues, but something that would be extremely practical in a sense, something that we would provide the clients that are interested in developing engagement strategies with elements that were created that you can move around, that we can tweak, that you can use as ingredients somehow. Because any strategy, whether we're talking about engagement or something else, are based on using ingredients like a recipe and to be able to tailor the strategy. So let's look at some of these elements that we've developed. The idea, again, was to root our work in science, not only in fiction. In order to do so, we worked on several elements, key elements that emerge as really being at the core of any engaging strategy, any engagement strategy. So I will not go through all these elements. We've got a, I think, well-designed document that you can go through in order to explore them in detail. But let's look at some of them. For example, when you look at this chart, what you can see is the notion, the mere notion of enhancement. We've got huge ego. Well, I do. And the difference between you and I is I live with it pretty okay. Some of you don't, but it's okay. Enhancement and ego is something that is major. The fact is, whether I want to engage or not will depend on whether I feel good, whether I'm rewarded. And we have this reward system in the brain that fires some, neurotransmitters that makes us feel good, whether we're getting something, whether we're thinking about getting something. So the notion of reward, of pleasure, is key to any engagement strategy. The sense of belonging. Why do I get for what I do? The fact that some strategies depend only on the fact that you see a community, some brands, some companies are building communities. How can we measure that? How can we create that? How can we tweak things so that the sense of belonging is somewhat triggered in people? Because as soon as people belong to a community or have this sense of belonging, something happens, something we've all seen, which is herd behavior. The fact that you can tell people whatever you want, you can provide them with all the accurate information you want. Information is not alone. Information is necessary, but never sufficient. What is more effective is, of course, telling people what the others are doing. Showing people what the others are doing. Why? Because our brains are functioning in a way that we mirror the behavior of others. That if we do an action, if we see people doing an action, the pleasure increases in our brain. We have ways to measure that. We have ways to tweak that. And this is what basically the science of engagement is about. So of course, we're talking about all these ingredients. I think they brought me because of all the reputation about the French being good at cooking, etc. So this is how I cook engagement. But ultimately, like any strategy, it lies on major principles. And we've got 10 principles that emerge and that we've been able to identify not only on several markets, but in several countries. I recently went across the world to compare what are the invariants of engaging strategies in China, in India, in the UK, in France, in the US, on 4 continents. We've been able to identify what are these kind of commonalities that we need to play around for a successful engagement strategy to emerge, to be there. Of course, one that is super important is the mere notion of reciprocity. Engagement is not only about a brand, a product, a service being provided to people. People need to have a sense of reciprocity. At least a lot of people who are not authentic have a strategy to provide people with the illusion, the clients, the consumers, with the illusion of reciprocity. But what about authentic reciprocity? The way we engage. There is no surprise in the fact that social media has boomed, to say the least, and this is a huge understatement. It's because people participate. They have a possibility to be active. And this is not new. This is not specific to social media. You can see it in very old-fashioned products, in cooking, in the fact that you can provide people with, again, recipes. The fact also that it's super easy to capture people's attention. It's super easy to seduce in a love relation like that when people don't know anything about you. But what is super hard, on the other hand, is to make any relation, whether we're talking personal relation or engagement relation, last. How do you make durable engagement? How do you switch from capturing to building something that lasts? And this is also rooted in some insights from psychology, anthropology, and neuroscience. Something that is definitely rooted in our scientific work, in the way we measure it, and Julian is going to show you how we measure it, and also based on the prospective work that is going on at the moment.
Right. So you already saw it probably on the Elements slide. The Science of Engagement has won the Sabre Award for Best Product of the Year last year. This is not because it's only a theory that's nice to look at and that makes sense if like a charming French guy talks you through it. It's also, and by the way, you now have to cook for me, you know that, right? Anyhow, so we turned this into a measurable tool. And obviously, this is where a bit of the magic comes in, so I won't tell you exactly how we've done it. But this is an interesting end result. And or actually, for that, could I get a hand mic real quick? And I promise I'll give it back for the question session. Just to walk down there. So this is what we call a brand footprint, and I promise spider graphs, so here are spider graphs. What we can see here is a certain brand, and I want you to guess what that brand is, because when we talk about engagement, we want engagement, right? Yours. So have a look at this brand, and Olivier and I, we are going to characterize that brand a little bit for you, and then we want you to take a best guess at what this brand is. Perfect, thank you. Now, looking at this, it's a brand that really, and Olivier touched already on that really incites herd behavior. So this is a brand where if someone says, I'm going to buy there, someone's going to follow, right? It's a brand that has a really strong sense of belonging, so it creates a feeling of, you know, being part of a group, being part of a movement, being in there. It's a very desirable brand, meaning that there is an instant desire that it creates in you to get it. It's not, you don't have to think about it very long. It's kind of seeing a chocolate bar, a favorite chocolate bar, saying, I need that chocolate bar right now. It's also a brand that's a social totem, meaning that it is discussed over and over again. It's something that you can use in conversations that naturally pops up, kind of a cultural icon if you so want. It's a brand that's very well respected, and finally, it's a brand that's very accessible. That's what I would point out. And obviously a brand that to a lesser degree you spend a lot of time with, that is what involvement means, and a brand that's meaningful to you personally. So you can actually, you think it's useful in a way. And looking at this brand, what do you think that brand is? Yeah, over there? iPhone. iPhone? Do we hear something else? Coke? Starbucks. Anything else? Anyone? Nike. Come on, you're just, taking top brands off the shelves. I've got a feeling you're doing that to me.
Well, it's really interesting we're talking about product here. Aha, service.
Good, service is good. Anyone else? Want to take a guess? Shall I reveal it?
Drum roll.
Now, this brand is Amazon. So, and we'll go a bit through why Amazon has the footprint it has. So, what I want to point out first, because it's really unusual, is the high level of access it has. And I know I took away the access, so you can't see what this is actually rated on. But it is a very high score that we see for access, which obviously it has because it's very well designed. I could now, if I wanted to, really just grab my phone, iPhone by the way, grab it, go on Amazon. Order something. I could use the app if I wanted to. It's magnificently designed, it's quick, it's easy to use, I get what I want very quickly out of it. I see what my friends buy, so there we go back to herd behavior, right? A feeling of belonging because it comes up a number of times, right? You see a book at a friend's and you say, oh, where did you get that from? Oh, I got it from Amazon, that kind of thing. So it comes up in conversations that naturally really segues into social totems. You also get that desire factor, right? How many of you have bought something on Amazon and saw something else that you liked and immediately bought it? Yeah? Come on, you can admit it, right? Yeah, there's no shame in that. That is how it works. This is why it works, by the way. If no one of you would have raised their hands, I would have said, okay, let's just stop here and not go further. So this is Amazon. In terms of meaning and involvement, you can, obviously, if you want to, and there are other players in the field who do that way better than Amazon, by the way. You can spend a lot of time there, which is involvement, because you can browse Amazon on and clicking through recommendations and so on, seeing what others have bought. And in terms of meaning, you can then you can obviously buy products which are really meaningful. And there is another thing that really adds to Amazon's power here. So there's a question that we got in our panel. Part of Amazon's engagement footprints don't come from Amazon itself. It comes from the products that they sell, right? Because there's always that intertwinability of product and where you buy it. And Amazon can benefit from that, but it can also take damage from that, because if you get a faulty product from Amazon, you're going to blame both of them. Or maybe it was a delivery service, so it's not the product, it's not Amazon, but still, they will share part of the blame, and that will be reflected in the footprint, really. So that is how we've done it with Amazon. And obviously, there are a number of things we can now do with this. So we can do this across geographies. So this is in a certain market. If you look at Amazon in another market, access always stays the same. Desire, for example, doesn't. Belonging doesn't. Doesn't mean it changes entirely. There are always things that make a brand recognizable in most markets, but it definitely changes, and you can see how that changes. It also obviously changes per target group, so we've done this with a number of different audiences that we were looking at. We've done it across markets, and we can also do this in a number of other ways. But one of the most interesting things is obviously comparing brands, right? Once we're at it. So here we created a brand overlay. The one that is there in orange, sort of orange, is still Amazon, and the purple one is a different one. And I'm wondering if I can get some more engagement from you guys. What do you think the purple brand is?
Now it's Apple.
Now it's Apple?
Why?
Newness has increased.
Newness has increased? Good one.
Yeah? There's another one that appeared that wasn't there. Aesthetics. Newness, aesthetics.
Yep. Yep. Anyone would say, no, this is totally not Apple?
Don't get us wait, my brain is about to explode.
I'm so sorry. All right. So this is Apple, yes. What I would highlight is enhancement as well. This actually does come from the iPhone, and that idea that I can do things, because it was the first smartphone that actually worked in a way that was supposed to. So the first one that allowed me to check emails on the go and so on, looking at enhancement and how that works, right?
What's interesting there, however, is you might think that, oh, we guessed, hence it's obvious. And the one thing that is super hard for all of us, regardless the market and the jobs we have to do, is to deal with what we and the clients consider as obvious. The thing is that this measure is super sensitive to context. For instance, the kind of invariance we found on Amazon across markets was very sensitive to the crisis Amazon was going through in Germany when we did it in Germany. Apple, the same way. When Apple was hit with some questions about the quality of a product, when Samsung was taking over some parts of the market, we would see some aspects that were changing. So it's not only useful in order to compare brands, but also to see how dynamically across a year, across a couple of years, the brand is evolving.
Right. So the question now is, once we have those wonderful footprints, and if you remember earlier spider graphs that we have seen before, the question is, what do we do with that? So engagement to what end, right? And the thing we found, in the beginning, we looked at signs of engagement and thought, well, this is basically about brand awareness or brand reputation, that kind of thing. Then we found out afterwards, we can actually attach it to sales, we can attach it to loyalty, we can attach it to employee advocacy, to donations, to sustainable behavior, to basically anything there is, therapy adherence. We do have a very interesting other client at the moment, which unfortunately I can't disclose right now, but you'll hear about it, is from the pharmaceutical area, where we're actually looking at therapy adherence, trying to use the signs of engagement to make people more adherent to whatever medication they have to take. Same pretty much for donations, same pretty much for employee advocacy. So there's a whole report dedicated to how internal engagement works within companies and a number of other things. Same goes for voting behavior. So we can not only look at brands that way, we can look at topics, we can look at people, we can look at a number of things through this, since the theory behind this is really agnostic. This works across industries and it works across issues. Yeah. Now, that gets me to the most technical part, and I'll be really quick with that because it'll scare most of you, and that is the intention behind it. So what we do afterwards, once we have the footprint, we create what we call an engagement map. An engagement map basically shows us what the spider graph shows on the x-axis, so the brand's average rating on all of those elements. On the y-axis, in this case, it's the importance for loyalty, for customer loyalty. And what I show you now is the distribution of elements for a coffee brand. And as I said, this looks confusing, and I'll make it even more confusing in a minute. Now we know how important each of those brands is for maintaining customer loyalty, and we know how that company is rated. Once again, on the x-axis rating, y-axis importance. What we can see here now is that if I would draw a trend line through this, which I've just done by this magical click, this is a brand that performs quite well because we see the trend lines going up when it comes to importance. So a brand that does rather well. And it's another, as you can imagine, a big one, a super brand. What we can see now is that aesthetics is one of the drivers that actually uniquely drives this brand. So we can tell within the industry whether a single element drives the whole industry or whether it actually specifically drives a brand. Most of those things there drive more or less the whole industry. Aesthetics doesn't. It specifically drives this one company. And now, if by even more magic, we want to separate the elements that are important from those who are not important, and again, I don't have time to explain why this is, it is across this 0.4 threshold. So we see up there 4 elements which are really important to drive customer loyalty in that category. That now allows us to tailor communications, to tailor tactics to a number of things that we can do with them, change them, really drive the aesthetics forward in this case, play with them, expand them, more pictures, more video content, and this doesn't sound surprising to you because people have said it for years, but it could have been different here, and so on, so on. So this is what we can do in terms of planning with this tool, really. And finally, obviously, because we said insights look into the future, this is what he's smart. It's predictive modeling that is behind this, and this is what makes most of us run for the hills. I'm not going to explain it. This is simply there to scare you.
How so?
Totally easy, right? You just got it right away, right?
Come on, this is brain candy to me, but I am a geek, so go ahead.
Right. So what this basically tells us is, and in simple words, what we can say is, if we increase our average rating on aesthetics, for example, we can up the game and see how many more people would actually purchase the product and see if that comes true or not. And we can see the rating. So once again, and we've heard that a number of times right now, it needs a little bit of time to deploy the tool, but once it's set, it's very, very quick, and we can see how that changes day by day, but also obviously over years, depending on how that goes. So we can dial this up and down and see what works for specific audiences as well. And that is really the beauty of it.
And we managed to test it against the actual evolution of the market backwards, meaning that in double-blind process, for those who are familiar with that, we managed to look at how the model fitted the evolution back to be able to see the predictability of a model, and we were pretty satisfied with it, and our clients were even more satisfied.
Yep, they were. Thankfully, they still are. One more thing, and I have to keep the timer in mind here because he has some other fascinating things to show you, but I want to do this little quiz with you. So we've looked at something else, which is how men and women engage differently. And I'm not from the States, so I can say this right now, right? It might be a little bit politically incorrect. So we have social totems on the one side, talking about things, herd behavior, that element of access, needing things quickly, desire, wanting things instantly, shared values, the idea of sharing values, and respect, mutual respect. That's the one side. The other side is newness, looking towards new things. It's intrigue, being intrigued by stories which are half told, where you have to look around the corner, do a little bit yourself, show a little bit of effort. Integrity, that you can rely on each other's word. Associations, a number of things that come to your mind when you see, for example, a brand like Apple with the apple or Nike with a swoosh. Meaning, it's personally meaningful, and enhancement, which we already explained. Looking at that, what do you think? Which side is male, which side is female?
And this is where I live.
He didn't see that yet. So what does the expert think?
Come on, I know the answer.
You do? Oh, you saw me change your slides, right? Oh.
All right, you guys take a stab at it.
Right is female?
All right, can we stop recording because people are afraid here. So who's right?
In short, girls have more elements over here that make them talkative, that make them work together, and that make them get to things easily. Men, on the other hand, have more things over there that let them look at new stuff, that tries to find improvements over previous ways. So all the things that they needed to do when they were alone hunting mammoth in the cold night, that kind of stuff.
And
so that's why.
Because engagement is also about intrigue, he's not going to tell you now on which product, market, etc. this was tested. You need to talk to him afterwards.
Precisely. So a little bit of what I call future past. So this is where we go into what we are currently doing and what we will be doing in the future. And let me just skip this, and let me skip this as well, because it's not as interesting as what Olivier has to say on this one. So please have a go.
Yeah, so the one thing I think you guys came to me is because for more than a decade, I've been working on measuring the gap between what people say and what people do, what people think they do and what people really do. And we know that we all spend lots and lots and lots of money on surveys, on any verbal measure, because this is the core of our data. And with the science of engagement, part of it is also a verbal feedback on asking people. But the important part here is part of it. What we're doing now, thanks to new toys that are totally portable, is we're able to record the activity of people's brains and to record the movement of our eyes and some elements of facial expression, emotional reaction, while they are evolving in their real lives. We have a part of a research that is conducted in labs, just like your usual market research. But now we can put people in front of TV in their houses. We can put them in a supermarket and know what they like, how they react without asking them. But of course, we do ask them afterwards. Why? Because we want to be able to measure the gap between what they think they do and what they do. And this is the key information today for us in order to build and to tweak our engagement strategies, is to have an estimate of this gap between intention and action. And in order to tailor our engagement strategies, we're doing things, we're tweaking the elements of engagement in order to narrow this gap between intention and action. And it's actually the measure we've been working on for about a year. And now, in order to wrap this up, our next challenge and the big algorithm we're working on at the moment is to bridge this very individual data, the individual behavior, how people engage at the individual level to mass behavior. Some people would say big data, I would say collective data, collective behavior. How do we connect those two? We know that they are connected. The problem is, how do we manage to get some insights from the big collection of individuals and basically what we call market data to one person and back? Because this is exactly what we have. We need to bridge that gap, and this is what we've been working on over the past 6 months, in addition to the individual side and brain, emotional reaction, eye tracking part, all these gizmos of science of engagement. And I think we're happy to talk about it today because we're working with a hardware company in tailoring all the softwares, all the methodology. And we've got a first client on that kind of likes
Precisely,
it, right?
and we will be back next year with another 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Fascinating. Do I have a question for Julian and Olivier?
Hi, that was really fascinating, as Barry said. Really great, thank you. I wonder, do you need to be a geek to do some of this stuff? Or do you think some of us, comms professionals, can apply some of this in practice in real life when we go back after this conference?
I think there are two sides. There is one side which is really just like, I don't know which research you're conducting, but we all develop our own methodology, which is very specific and we spend a lot. But it was really important for us to work on the user experience of our result and our methodology. The thing is, how can we take all this complexity into very simple and very visual measures, which I think are captured by our footprints of engagement, the spider graph. And this is why ultimately there is a lot of complexity beneath it. It's just like a watch. If you know and mount your watch, it's super complex, but ultimately you read the time and it's very easy to read it. And this is what we had on our minds. So yes, you will be able to use it because ultimately the outcome is simple to understand.
Yeah, there's a little bit of common sense in it as well for brands like Apple and so on. You see a few things that you always thought were true anyway that come out as true. And sometimes it really throws you back. So with that huge coffee company, which I think you can imagine which coffee company that is, but when you don't look at loyalty but at purchase, we thought, well, it's going to be aesthetics as well, right? It's their design that really gets people. We looked at purchase behavior and surprise, surprise, that whole map totally changed. And we saw that aesthetics is not what gets people to buy it for the first time. It just doesn't. It's what keeps people there and what keeps people in the loop once they bought it, but it's not really decisive for purchase. So this is where probably comes in where we need to replicate some of this and do this. But the thinking behind it applies to a number of things. And we've also done short presentations, which are, I think, even available online on industry. So for example, looking at the whole beer industry and saying, this is what generally sells beer. Now, it could be that for your specific beer company, it's totally wrong. But in general, that is why people drink beer. And all those things are applicable.
Thank you for sharing with us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you next year with the toys.